This podcast was created using Anchor. Anchor is the free podcast platform that allows you or anyone to set up and start your own podcast free of charge so that your voice is heard. It's because they believe in the democratization of audio, pure and simple. That's why I use their platform. Anchor.fm or the Anchor app will get you there. This is Rumble with Michael Moore, and I am Michael Moore. My guest today is Stephanie Kelton, and Stephanie, you may have heard of her, seen her, listened to her, read her. She is a professor of economics and public policy at the State University of New York in Stony Brook, New York, and fine school. I've spoken there, and I've asked her to come on today because the thing that's facing us right now is obviously we're in the middle of a huge calamity, and it has brought to the forefront so many issues about how we function as a society and the income inequality that exists. And so I know Stephanie's work because, in part, in addition to her teaching and her writing, she also has been an economics advisor to Senator Bernie Sanders' campaigns, both in 2016 and in 2020. Welcome to Rumble.
Thank you so much for having me.
I kind of want to just jump right into this because the House passed a bill, a relief bill, about 9 or 10 days ago, and I think everybody thought the Senate would just pick it up and then we'd have something to help people. We can talk a little bit about the Democrats' bill in the House, which wasn't, in my opinion, everything it could have or should have been. But we have gone another whole week with the Senate not only holding this up, but Trump being involved to not bring relief to people who've lost their jobs during this crisis with the coronavirus, but to basically have another bailout, have another gift to corporations that are, taking a bit of a hit right now. So can we just jump in right there? Because tell us what the hell is going on with this bill or these bills. What is the Senate really up to? The Senate is going to be in session again tomorrow, which when people hear this, they were going to be probably listening to this is Sunday already. So they are in session. And then they say they're going to take a vote on Monday. I just have this awful feeling that the people are getting screwed right now at the same time that they're having to worry about whether or not their loved ones are going to die in the next month. Help me out here.
Well, yeah, you're absolutely right. You've got, on the one hand, a sense of urgency that you're at least hearing lawmakers talk as though they need to move something and move it quickly. The Democrats were early on talking about this would be bill number 3 that we're talking about. The Democrats were talking about $750 billion, and that was a number that Senator Elizabeth Warren put out there. Chuck Schumer said he liked that number. He thought it was a good number. Steve Mnuchin in the White House, there were you started to hear $850 billion. And then somebody said that Donald Trump likes round numbers. And so all of a sudden it became $1 trillion. And all the while they decide which number they want to move forward with, people are losing their jobs. The wheels are coming off the economy. And now, maybe we're looking at $2 trillion. That's the latest number to come out.
Now, wait a minute. Wasn't the idea of this bill was to provide relief for people who've lost their jobs?
Yeah.
So they could get, a good chunk, if not most, or maybe in a perfect world, all of the money that they've been living on, because most working people have a budget that they live on, and they are barely able to make it. They live from paycheck to paycheck. And if anything goes a little off in that equation, all of a sudden, they're getting collection notices. Their credit rating is going down, and somebody's threatening to take away the car or the house or the whatever. And then this just kind of spirals out of control. If I sound like I've been through this in the past, it's understandable, because I know what I'm talking about, because I was one of those people, so I know what this feels like, and I know the panic that sets in. So, but it's no longer. I don't hear any talk about this. They're going to send a check to everybody for $1,000 or something, but that's, of course, that's just chump change. That's nothing. That's not going to fix anything. So, this what started as Elizabeth's $750 billion idea, and I think, if I remember, most of her ideas were not about writing, multi-billion-dollar checks to American corporations.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So the Democrats and I've spoken to some of them, as they've been putting legislation together, and they really are singularly focused, those at least that I've spoken with, on trying to make sure that, the money goes where it is most needed. And you already see K Street is salivating at the idea of $1 trillion or $2 trillion bill being pushed through really hastily. And they're already, they're clamoring for their piece of the action here. So, yeah, the Democrats understand exactly what you said, Michael. I mean, this is for many, many people for whom the next paycheck is how they buy their groceries, is how they barely make their rent payment, is how they make their student loan payment, whatever it is. Exactly as you said, if something goes just a little bit wrong, they miss a payment, and then there is fallout from that. And then it's just a cascading domino effect, right? Ripples through the system as people begin missing a rent payment, missing a mortgage payment, missing a car payment, missing a student loan payment. So Democrats understand that this is the situation they're facing, and that they need something very big, that they need a sizable piece of legislation, and that they need to find ways to get the money to the people and to avoid, to the extent possible, having the third party, the lobbyists, K Street, strip this thing, pick it dry. But it remains to be seen. The signs now don't look very good. You've got the airlines asking for $50 billion. You got the hotel industry asking for $150 billion of this. You got the restaurant industry saying they need $145 billion. The National Association of Manufacturers wants $1.4 trillion, and it just goes on and on.
Oh, I know. I heard the casino industry wants $40 billion because, nobody can go to the casinos now. I mean, I've heard so many things that the McConnell and these guys are trying to cram into this to help out all their buddies, all the cronies. And, it just makes me, I want you and I to meet at Penn Station in an hour so that we can get on the Amtrak Acela and get down to D.C., because this is all going to happen in the next 24 hours. And we, the people, are not going to have a say about this. I mean, in your perfect world, let's say it was a $750 billion bill that they were going to pass. What should be, ideally, in that bill? Where, ideally, should this money be going for right now and in the near future, so that we don't have, one tragedy upon another here? Yeah,
well, first let me say $750 billion is way too small. You got to multiply that by at least 3.
Wow. Okay, so we are talking $2 trillion.
Yeah, absolutely. This thing should be at least $2 trillion. We can see the wave of what's coming ahead of us. And we don't want to be, like we did after the financial crisis, trying to go back to the well after everybody's appetite for doing more has dried up. So we need to spend a lot of money. Look, I think that states are on the front lines of this. Their budgets are absolutely going to get decimated, like they did last time, but worse. And so taxes are going to fall off a cliff, and emergency spending is going to explode. So we have got to get money to state and local governments. I would do that on a per capita basis. I was running some of the numbers yesterday. I think if you did $2,000 per capita, you're looking at $600 billion in aid to state and local governments. I would do that. We need money in the hands of working people. I mean, I said that the thing that I would do is try to keep workers on payroll. We don't want employers shedding workers because they can't afford to keep them on payroll. I would do Medicare for all, immediately lower the eligibility age to 0.
Yeah.
And then I would help them keep their workers attached to their job on payroll. I'll say it, nationalize payroll. Keep these workers paid at the wages and salaries that they've been receiving, because like you said in the beginning, they're spending everything just to cover the bills every month. So they need half of their income replaced. They need to stay on payroll, keep attached to the job. And right now we're telling workers, your job is to stay home. So we have to make it possible for them to do that, pay them to stay home.
Right. If you're ordered by your boss, because the boss has been ordered by the government to send you home, this isn't a choice you've made. You are home at the behest of the boss. So whenever you are working, whenever you're having to follow the orders of the boss, for every moment of that, you should be paid for it. Am I wrong?
No, I think you're absolutely right. And you know what? You're seeing countries already start to do this. The Scandinavian countries, not surprisingly, I think are doing it in some of the most generous ways. But even the UK in the last day or so has come out and said, listen, we're going to try to keep people on payroll. We're going to help employers replace 80%.
80. I know. I saw that Boris Johnson is proposing this. The Trump of the UK. Right. Wow. What is wrong with us? How do we let this stuff? So you're saying basically send the money to the state and local governments, and they will do what with it? They will distribute it in a way to make sure that people stay on the payroll. Yeah.
I mean, you're hearing, like in New York, you're hearing Governor Cuomo talk about doing things like telling factories, if you will make the ventilators we need, we will place the orders. If you will make the hospital gowns and the masks, and if you will do these things, we will place the orders. They're going to be commandeering, beds at NYU and Stony Brook University. They're going to spend money to have places to put people. They're going to build places. They're going to take over stadiums and arenas. I mean, these states are going to have a massive budget.
They're turning the Javits Center, which is the convention center in New York, into a 1,000-bed hospital.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, I think the state and the city own that place. So it's amazing.
Yeah, they're obviously major employers, and we don't want to see, workers laid off because the state's budget is hemorrhaging.
Well, that keeps everybody working at the Javits Center, at the Stony Brooks, at the places that they're going to be using. So that's obviously a good thing. I saw that press conference where he was literally, it almost sounded like he was begging, if there's anybody, any factory, any company that will make these ventilators, will pay for the assembly line changeover, whatever has to happen, whatever you need. It was just, what happened to back when when World War II, where they didn't ask or beg, they just told General Motors, you will stop building cars today.
Exactly.
You will start building tanks and planes tomorrow. And they did. That's exactly what they did. My grandmother went into the AC spark plug, which is part of General Motors in Flint. And they went from making those little spark plugs to making machine guns. And just my grandma on the assembly line, there's just like machine guns coming down the assembly line, and it just, somebody figured that out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Back when they had a lot less technology than we have now.
You're not making ladies' dresses any longer. You're making uniforms for soldiers. You're not making high shoes. You're making boots. You're exactly right. Meals ready to eat and all the rest of it. We're not acting like this is an emergency. So
the number one thing we need is to keep people on payrolls, to keep income coming into people so that their lives do not unravel and fall apart in these next months. So that's number one of the two plus trillion that we're going to need. What's the next thing we need with that money? Would that help? Well,
if you've got people's incomes and you're making them whole in that regard, then I don't think you need to do as much on the other side, which some people are talking about in terms of, a holiday on rent and mortgage, or a holiday on taxes or something. People can afford to meet recurring expenses if you're replacing all of the income that they would have lost. So I think that the aid to states is huge.
Seemed like the banks and the landlords would love that. That would mean the banks would get their mortgages paid. The landlords, the rent would start coming in, Well, why wouldn't they be on board with this? It's because they're going to be the ones ending up with the money. That's what happens. I mean, working people, they don't hoard their money. They spend it. And in spending it, that makes the rich rich. It also creates jobs for other people, because if you're going to spend your money on the things that you need, food and clothes and et cetera, you're putting other people to work.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what most people are going to do, if you can keep them whole, is just those recurring expenses. We're not all going out. Nobody's taking a summer vacation this year. So we're putting off, and there is going to be some pent up demand because, if we have some of the income that we would have gone to the shopping mall and spent, or we would have gone to the casino or wherever, you're going to hang on to a little bit. You might actually end up saving some money for the first time, many families in a long time. But then as we get control of this, we get control of the spread of the virus, and at some point life returns to normal, that's what everybody's hoping for, is that we get this bounce back, this snapback in demand as consumers are able to leave the house and go back into the stores and the restaurants and the shopping malls and so forth. So it'd be a great thing if we protected people through this crisis so that they're actually in a position not loaded up with debt. That's the thing that worries me. A lot of people are saying that what we have to do now is provide loans to people to help them get through the crisis, bridge loans, low interest, no interest loans. The last thing in the world I want is to load people up with debt.
Right.
And then we come out on the other end of it. You've got no job and you're loaded up with tens of thousands of dollars of debt.
No, that's bad. Because we are going to come out of this virus. Sadly, we're going to lose a lot of people, but the virus doesn't live forever. And it will be done sometime. I mean, I'm going by, what Zeke Emanuel and the others have said, the people connected to the NIH, Dr. Fauci. This could be a 2-year pandemic, and it's going to have its peaks and its valleys. And then the valleys are when we're going to be able to come out of the house and function semi-normally, and then it will come back in a few months, and then we've got to hunker down again. All of it trying to slow it down. And then perhaps we'll have a vaccine or whatever, but people need to sort of start wrapping their heads around this. This is not a 2-week or a 2-month ordeal we're going to be in the middle of. And having said that, I don't know if you believe those, the analyses that have been done, but they seem pretty reputable to me. And if that's the case, Stephanie, what is it? How do we get through 2 years of this?
Well, I think that this is, in a lot of ways, there is an opportunity in this, right? That we have the chance, if we were strategic and if we made the right kinds of investments, we can come out of this with a stronger economy. Because, Michael, this isn't going to be the last time we face this. I mean, these viruses, they come up. I don't know how many we've had in the last 6-8 years, decade, whatever it is, but I'm pretty sure, I feel fairly certain this isn't going to be the last time. And what this has exposed, of course, is that, we've got these vulnerabilities and weaknesses throughout our economy. Our social safety net is frayed and barely existent in many ways. We've, our healthcare system, our trade policies, the supply chain, it's showing us all of these ways in which our society and our economy is vulnerable. So if we were strategic about this going forward, and as we get through the crisis, we start doing things like, we're not going to let all these industries fail. There are going to be rescues, bailouts, whatever you want to call it, for the restaurant industry, for the airlines, for the hotel industry. But we have to make sure that when we come out on the other side, that those industries don't look like they did before and they don't behave the way they did before.
Give me some examples of what that would look like. What does that mean? That they can't, on the other end of this, they can't be behaving and acting and functioning like they were before this.
You can put conditions on these loans. You can take an equity stake in the firm. You can say, when you start rehiring workers, all of your workers need to be paid a living wage. You have to allow them to unionize. You have to have worker representation on boards. No buybacks, a period of years before you can pay dividends again. You have to come up with a plan to show that you're taking steps to get to net zero.
I know. Yeah. Back in 2009, I was like begging President Obama when he took over the auto industry, General Motors and Chrysler, to use this as an opportunity to come out on the other end of this with a different kind of transportation company that we need in the 21st century. And I kept appealing to him. I mean, it sounded like I was out standing on the doorstep of the White House. I mean, I did my best. I'm not personal friends with him. So, but I went on TV and I made my voice heard that we could take this time now that you, Barack Obama, and the federal government, you essentially own General Motors. You are the de facto CEO of this company. So we know that the internal combustion engine is killing the planet. We know that that the car as we know it today will not exist at the end of this century. There's no way it will exist. So why not turn General Motors and Chrysler into 21st century transportation companies? You're going to, the government maybe shouldn't be in the business of building cars, but before you turn it back to them, do what you just said. Have this sort of the quid pro quo, if we can still use that term, of we're going to help you out, but in return, here's what you're going to do. We're going to lower carbon emissions. We're going to have different kind of transportation. I read that this week the Chinese have like 2,700 bullet trains connecting 550 cities. We have 0 bullet trains. We invented the train. We and the Brits. We invented the train. Where General Motors turned the factories into building high-speed rail, build light rail, build all the different kinds of things that, and of course they just gave General Motors back the company, and they're still building the same crappy cars that are killing the planet. And actually they're building, I think the cars are a little better, just to be honest. But you know what I'm saying? You're right. This is the moment where we could fix so much of this if we're going to give our money, our tax money, to these companies. Let's ask for something in return. I maybe I went off the rails there. No pun intended. But it just seems like that there's some silver lining here if we set this up and do it right.
I think so. I mean, I think, and we're looking at a situation now of Goldman Sachs is warning of the possibility of seeing unemployment claims spike next week. The last round of claims, it was 281,000. They're saying brace yourself for the possibility of 2.25 million people next week firing for unemployment.
Next week.
One of the other things we could do, I think FDR, and I think of the Second Bill of Economic Rights, and those are the kinds of safeguards and protections that if we had been able to follow through with that and guarantee everyone a right to a job, a right to healthcare, a right to housing, a right to a secure retirement, a right to an education, just securing those basic rights, right? So that when an event like this happens and millions and millions of people are thrown out of their jobs, that there's a place for them to transition to. And it is called public service employment. It is a federal job guarantee. And it's what Coretta Scott King fought for, and Martin Luther King Jr. and FDR, and on and on. And if we had something like that in place, we could take those people into the program today. We could begin today. Some of them would be idle because we don't currently have a place to put everyone. We don't want everyone out doing things. But when we begin to ramp up, some of them could be delivering, meals to people who need meals. There's could be helping sew masks.
You're saying like a public works program like they did during the Depression.
Yeah, and exactly
the WPA, Civilian Conservation Corps.
Exactly. So when we're through this crisis, where it's funny to say it in a sense because we're already in a climate crisis. It's just that the more immediate crisis in our face is the pandemic, but it isn't as if when the pandemic is under control, we're not still in a crisis. We are still in a crisis, and we have to begin to address that crisis. So
what can we do in these 24 hours before they take this bill out to the floor tomorrow? What can people listening to this do? I mean, how can we have our voices heard? Why did Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats start with such a kind of a weak bill to begin with 12 days ago? I mean, that's my read of it. Maybe you have a different read of it.
I'm afraid I don't. No, that was, to provide, expand unemployment insurance. But as we quickly discovered, the bill only covered about 20% of the workforce. And this is the thing. The House actually has some leverage right now. They could have really dug in and gone for something ambitious and said, I dare you in this moment to fight back and say that you're going to say that you're not going to pass the bill that puts the most money that we can put into the hands of the working people who are going to get hit the hardest by this. Challenge them, let them, but they didn't do that.
So what do we do now? Because what they're going to do within the 24 hours here, they're going to give, I don't know, what is it? The last number I heard, $200 billion to the airline industry, who already got a big tax cut thanks to Trump, and these companies that used it to do stock buybacks, which can you explain that to just the average person listening to this, of how absolutely insane this so-called tax cut was supposed to, they were supposed to use that money to do things that would create jobs and would help benefit the economy. Instead, what happened? What did these companies do when Trump gave them their big tax cut?
Well, 95% of the corporate tax cut windfall went to stock buybacks and mergers and acquisitions.
Wow. Just 95%.
Yeah, 95%. None of this, you're going to share. We heard a little bit early on about bonuses for workers and all that kind of stuff. No. Those were some feel-good stories, and they were by far and away the exception to the rule. The overwhelming majority, virtually all of it, was used to buy back shares, to pump up the share price.
And why do they do that? Why do they buy back shares of their own company?
Well, because CEOs are rewarded based on the price of their shares.
Right. So it helps the price go up when they do this, when they do these buybacks.
Right. So they're pushing up the price of the shares, and then CEOs get a reward in terms of their pay package because share prices are up.
So isn't this also just to help them because the stock market has gone down so far that trillions of dollars of, what they consider wealth, because the companies, the stock prices have gone down. And so they were living pretty high and enjoying this, what seemed to me to be kind of an inflated, fake sense of, wow, look at the boom we're in. And I mean, I don't know. Again, I never took an economics class, so I just think from my own knowledge of history that when these crazy booms happen, it's a sign that something bad is about to go down here, because the economy cannot sustain, where we have been with things like the stock market.
Yeah, I mean, you want the value of the share to reflect, economists or finance people would say, underlying fundamentals, right? The general health and profitability of the company. But when you get in these kind of speculative euphorias where, people are just plowing money into the stock market and price earning ratios, double and triple and quadruple, you start to get a sense that there's overvaluation, to put it in the most polite possible terms.
If you were not polite, how would you put it?
A speculative frenzy, overvalue, a wild casino gambling frenzy.
Thievery.
In some respects, yeah.
Not exactly an economist term, but in a sense, it's really what's going on, right? I mean, it's a theft from the working people. The money is taken from them, and making the wealthy even wealthier.
Yeah, and you can see it. You can just see it in the data, and you can see that break point. It happens right about the time of Ronald Reagan, when workers, the ability of workers to share in the productivity gains of the just part ways. Workers' wages sort of flatline, and worker productivity continues to climb. And the difference between the two is what's going to the boss, what's going to the corporation.
Okay, so the senators are there. They're there right now. That means the switchboard is open on Capitol Hill. If people listen to this, if they wanted to call their senators today, what should they say to them about this bill that's being considered, this so-called relief bill, What is it that you want to encourage people to speak up, to go to the phones, to melt the switchboard today, to let these senators know they're going to be in deep trouble if this bill doesn't benefit the working people of this country?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. You want to let your representative know that you're watching, that you're aware that these major industries are going to get bailed out, and that you don't want a blank check being handed over to these industries, that you want accountability, that these corporations have to be accountable. And we talked already about some of the kinds of things that Congress can do to put strings on the money that they're handing out. They're going to hand out billions and billions and hundreds of billions of dollars. So you need to put them on notice that you are absolutely not going to accept a giveaway, a bailout of these major industries on a no strings attached sort of basis. And even more importantly, that this bill needs to have as its central focus the working people and families in this country. So the bottom line is that we have to do everything in our power to keep them whole financially.
So we need the U.S. Senate and the U.S. Congress to guarantee people's payroll.
That's it.
They've been ordered home by their government and by their bosses. That's why they're standing in place at home, waiting to be called back, and they need to be paid for this time.
They're doing their job.
They're doing their job.
That's right.
If you're on the plane and you're sitting on the runway at LaGuardia for 2 hours because you're just in a hold, that, the pilot's still getting paid. Everybody, the flight attendants are getting paid. Everybody's getting paid. You can't say, well, yeah, but the plane wasn't able to fly for 2 hours. So it doesn't matter. Everybody gets paid. We have to have this attitude right now, today, about the people who have been ordered home have to be paid because they've been told to go home and stand ready, because when we're able to get through this pandemic, you're coming back to work. We need to guarantee that. That's number one. And the number two thing today is no bailouts without strings to these industries that have already been the recipient of an enormous tax cut. Do I have it right? Are those?
Those are the two things that I think are front and center. They're the most important things. And to get money to states, get lots of money to states and our territorial areas. Right?
Okay, so let me just take a second and remind people of the phone numbers that I always give out of the Capitol Hill switchboard. You could write this down. You could memorize it, but I'll post it on my platform here on the podcast platform. But let me give it to you right now, everybody. What Stephanie is just talking about here, what we need to do is we need to get on the phone to our senators. If you don't know their names, when you call the switchboard, just tell them what state you're from, and they'll connect you to one of the two senators. They'll tell you who the two names are, and you can say who you want to talk to first, and then call back and talk to the other one. Here's the number. You ready? 202-225-3121. I'll give it to you again. 202-225-3121. You may be put on hold for a bit because, when I do this, it creates a lot of phone calls. That's okay. Stick with it. You've got to tell your senators. And don't say, oh, I've got a really liberal senator. I don't need to. Yeah, no. They need to hear your support. The Democrats who need to fight for these things, they need your support. And if you have a Republican senator, they need to know that you're watching. I like the way that Stephanie put it. We're watching you. We're watching you. We know exactly what you're up to, and we will not forget this. They need to hear that loud and clear right now. So when, either you can put the podcast on pause and do it, or wait till we're done here, because I want to get into something else here, Stephanie, that you've been a big proponent of, and I've loved reading about this. And it's called, if I got this right, Modern Monetary Theory. Is this correct? MMT?
Yes.
Modern Monetary Theory. And rather than me trying to explain it, but I want people to hear this, because here's a new, not so new, but new, fresh idea that needs to be on the table. We all need to be discussing this, because again, we have to find and figure out a different way to get from where we've been to the new place we're going to be after the pandemic. And Stephanie, I just got to say, do you marvel at all the things that that you or I, Bernie, others, Elizabeth, have been fighting for so long, have all of a sudden magically come into being here in these last couple of weeks? All the things that they keep saying, we don't have the money for that. Well, all of a sudden they've got a ton of money, or they'll. It's just a whole. I mean, everybody if you paid attention to the news the last couple of weeks, you've heard the president himself say there's a moratorium on you having to pay your student loan debt. What? Yeah, you're not setting this up to actually say that maybe we shouldn't be doing this in the first place, right? There's a $1.5 trillion of student loan debt that's out there, and everybody knows that $1.5 trillion is not going to get paid back, not entirely, not anywhere near entirely. So it's the, if the first shoe that dropped was with the housing situation back in 2008, there are two other shoes that have been waiting to drop, even though we only have 2 feet, and that is the incredible student loan debt that this country carries, and the credit card debt. So they've been so you don't have to do that. They've told the banks, and Bank of America came out yesterday, and others are saying, don't worry about, we're furloughing your mortgage payments. If you can't make it this month, next month, don't worry about it. Nobody's getting kicked out of the house. Nobody's having their house foreclosed on. I saw one governor. They're releasing all the nonviolent criminals to reduce the overcrowding, which is really going to be a huge human petri dish in these prisons for this pandemic. So they're releasing people that shouldn't be in prison, in my opinion, probably in the first place. Drug offenders, nonviolent offenders. What else? I mean, what are some of the other things I've seen? It's like, how about Medicare for all? We finally have it. We only have it. We only have one piece of it, which is they've said that the testing is going to be free for the coronavirus. Testing will be free. Treatment will be free. Don't worry. Don't worry about. You must come in. You must not go out and infect other people. We'll pay for this. And then they said, how are we going to pay it? Somebody said, we'll just make it part of Medicare. Oh my God. It's like, so Medicare for all when it comes to the pandemic. It's a start. I'm just saying, have you noticed this, Stephanie, how many things where it's kind of like, it's like they've taken some drugs and all of a sudden they're in Bernie land.
Not only in terms of the policy, but the thing that they've also been doing, and you mentioned it, is this whole pay for thing is completely out the window. And it just really,
the thing where they're always saying, where they're at the debate and the moderator goes, well, how are you going to pay for that? Medicare for all, or the new Green Deal. How are you going to pay for that? How are you going to pay? And it's kind of like, every time they ask that question, I always think, well, what does it matter how you're going to pay for it? That's how you're going to pay for it, because we're losing the planet. You're going to pay for it because it's wrong that 50, 60, 70,000 people a year die simply because they don't have the health insurance that they need. That's how you're going to pay for it. You're going to pay for it because you have to pay for it. Morally, you have to pay for it. If your child has been struck by a car and you go out and your child's alive and you scoop your child up and you either waiting for the ambulance or you just put the child in the car to get to the hospital, you don't stop and think, hey, well, wait a minute, what's this going to cost me if I take this kid to the hospital? Doesn't matter, does it?
Well, there is a way in which it could matter. So if we were not in the midst of a pandemic and we had the old economy back and you said, well, 3.5% unemployment, on the surface, this looks like a reasonably healthy-ish economy. Obviously, it's not for roughly half the population, but leaving that aside, you say, okay, it doesn't look like there's a lot of slack in this economy, a lot of people that I could hire, a lot of room in the economy for the government to spend trillions of dollars right, doing infrastructure or Green New Deal things or canceling student debt or whatever, you might say that you have to kind of curb your enthusiasm a little bit, because in a full employment economy, resources become more scarce. And the economy, you get to a situation where you are constrained in terms of how much you can safely spend into the economy without offsets. And that's what it means. When Washington talks about pay-fors, what they really mean is, how are you going to offset that spending? So if you want to cancel it's really 1.7 trillion in student loan debt. If you want to do Medicare for all, if you want to do infrastructure, and you want to spend a couple of $1 trillion, the pay for question is about how you're going to offset that spending. So if you want to spend $2 trillion into the economy, you're supposed to demonstrate that you have a credible plan to rip $2 trillion out of the economy in some other way, either by raising taxes or by carving money out of some other part of the budget, so that you don't add to the deficit. That's what the pay for question is about. How are you going to do this in a way that's not going to add to the deficit? But here we are today. We are going to move legislation through. We've already done 100 billion plus, and we're going to do, it looks like, a couple of trillion, no offsets. And that means that in Washington speak, all of this spending that's about to get moved through the House and Senate and signed by the president is going to be an instruction from Congress to go out and spend $2 trillion without offsets, which means they're going to add to the deficit. Now, that's a perfectly reasonable thing to do. There's no way in this economy they should be trying to raise taxes to offset to keep the deficit from increasing. It's right to just spend the money. And we can do that now because obviously the wheels are coming off, and we're not going to create an inflation problem. The risk is that if you try to spend too much into an economy that is already reached or very close to its full employment capacity constraint, the punishment for spending more and more and more is inflation. But we're not in that situation today. So what we're getting is a really good demonstration of how Congress can write and pass bills and fund projects, fund spending without the need to raise taxes.
So when we hear this, because I think we've all been trained to, when we hear deficit, it's going to increase the deficit. Oh, that's a bad thing, or it's, and even to a working person, when they hear that, oh, we're just going to borrow more money from the big banks and my tax dollars are going to go to making interest payments to these large banks. And that is not why I'm going to work every day, so that I am paying this money to the big banks. What do you say to people who have a very legitimate concern because they're led to believe that I think this is how the equation works?
Yeah, it's so much to unpack what you just did, because so much damage has been done to us, frankly.
I know. See if you can do it in 30 seconds. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah.
But
so we have been so poorly educated about these things. And it starts with the very moment that a politician says that we have to get our fiscal house in order. As soon as they say house, they're trying to get us to think of the federal government's budget the way we think of our own household budget. And we understand our own finances. You can't spend more than you take in. You can't take on more and more debt and expect to come out of that okay at the end. And so it's very easy for public officials to talk to us using language that we're already familiar with, our own personal finances, and to liken the federal government's budget to a household budget. And once they successfully do that, then everything else follows. They turn us against deficit spending. They make us fearful about the national debt and so forth. And so I wrote a book to try to help people, really inoculate them to these myths and misunderstandings about deficits. Because look, the Republicans in December of 2017 passed these huge tax cuts, right? And they blew up the deficit. They added almost $2 trillion to deficits over the course of 10 years because of the tax. They didn't do that because they think deficits are bad for people. They did that because they understand perfectly well that every deficit is good for someone, because the government's deficit just means that the government is depositing more money into the economy. It's spending more in than it is taxing back out. So their deficits are our surpluses. Their red ink is our black ink. The question is, for whom are those deficits working? And in the case of the tax cuts, we know that 83% of the benefits went to people in the top 1% of the income distribution. Corporate tax cuts, of course, benefited big corporations, and we already talked about the buybacks and so forth. So they understand that deficits are a way to deliver a financial contribution, to make a financial contribution to some other part of the economy. They just want to steer it into the pockets of the people they're most interested in serving. So when Democrats have the opportunity, the last thing I want is to see Democrats start, squawking and squealing about deficits and trying to reduce the size of deficits. Deficits are our surpluses. We just want to retool that deficit. We want to use it and deploy it in the interest of working people and families across this country, small businesses, and not allow those deficits to be exploited almost exclusively for the people who least need the help.
So in your modern monetary theory, and this is, whenever you say theory, it's, I'm always afraid of losing people, because it's, okay, I did take one economics class. I've 1 year of college in me, and I dropped out the second day of the class, because it was really it was just too much for my head, to wrap it around. I just couldn't do it. But as I grew up, I realized the importance of paying some attention and becoming somewhat educated about this. But I was reading the theory, and I just thought, wow, this is genius. This just seems such a good idea. Why wouldn't people be in favor of it? Can you just explain it in very basic language to people? I mean, the people listening to my podcast are not stupid. I mean, they will understand.
Yeah, no, I sure can try. I mean, the basic idea is that as I said before, the federal government is not like a household. We have this idea that the federal government needs to find the money, needs to come up with revenue in order to spend. And that the way that they do that is by coming to us, right, the taxpayer. So they collect money by raising taxes or borrowing from China. And then once they have the dollars, then they're in a position to go out and spend. And what MMT does is say, hang on, wait a minute, we're getting this backwards. Households have to find money before they can spend. A business has to have money before it can spend. State and local governments have to have revenue in order to spend. But the federal government is fundamentally different. And the thing that makes it different is that the federal government, think of Uncle Sam, is the issuer of the dollar. The United States dollar comes from the U.S. government, and it can't come from anywhere else. They are the issuer of our currency. And because they're the issuer, we could think of them as a monopolist, right? They have a monopoly on the creation of the US dollar. If I try to do it, it's called counterfeiting. It's against the law. I can't do it. Only the federal government can issue the dollar. And if you get to that point where you understand that, then you understand that the government can never run out of its own currency. It can't go broke like Greece, which gave up its currency, the drachma, and started borrowing in what's effectively a foreign currency, the euro. And so countries like Argentina or Venezuela or Greece, you can get into real trouble when you start running deficits and borrowing and you have bills coming due. You have debt that's payable in a currency that you don't issue. But if you are the United States and your debt is denominated in US dollars, you can always afford to pay whatever you owe, whether it's a bondholder, whether it's future Social Security recipients, whether it's wages, you can always afford to make those payments. The constraint, and this is where MMT makes a really hard line and a big point, the constraint is inflation. It is not solvency. You can't you can't run out of your own currency. Sometimes we'll say the US government is the scorekeeper for the dollar. So what you're seeing right now, what Congress is doing, is it's about to instruct its bank, the Federal Reserve, to go out and change the numbers in people's accounts, whether it's going to be Boeing or Lockheed Martin or whomever. The Congress is going to give instructions to its bank to carry out payments on its behalf, And the Federal Reserve is going to make those payments, and those payments are going to clear because that's the Fed's job, to clear payments that have been authorized by Congress. So we've gotten a bad education. We've been told that, President Obama said in the middle of the Great Recession, he did an interview, he went on television, and they said to him, at what point do we run out of money? And he said, well, we're out of money now. And I thought, oh my goodness, we're just getting started. And there was that declaration that the U.S. government had basically run out of money,
Mm-hmm.
It just doesn't work like that. So that's why in this crisis moment, that's why California can't deal financially with the fallout of this crisis. It's why New York can't. It's why only the federal government can step up and commit to spending money it does not have. And it's different because it's the issuer, and the rest of us are just users of the U.S. dollar.
Right. That's the danger in thinking of the federal government as you. Like, they're just like us. The house analogy that you gave.
It's not going to run out of money. It can spend too much. Congress could authorize too much spending. And as we talked about, if we were in an economy, it's like World War II, right? You ramp up to mobilize for the war effort, and you're hiring everybody you can get your hands on, and you got people working double and triple overtime. And, you drive the unemployment rate down to essentially non-existent, and you got some inflationary pressures, but they managed it really effectively. And we got through the crisis and won the war and all that sort of stuff. So you can push spending too far. It's not, MMT doesn't say, there is no limit to spending. What we're saying is that we've been hewing to this artificial revenue constraint, to thinking of the government like a household, that it, needs to run its budget the way a household does, and that balanced budgets are good and deficits are de facto evidence of, fiscal malpractice. And they're just not. Fiscal deficits are critically important most of the time in the economy, but especially now.
You've been trying to bust a lot of these myths about how our economy is run, how it works. And one of the things I read that you said, and I think I've been one of the people that have just believed this, that essentially China is our bank, and that the Chinese own so much of this country, or we are in debt so much to the Chinese. But you've written that again we've been bamboozled here by our own politicians and corporate America, whatever, to be in this state. It almost sounds like now a version of when Trump keeps calling this the Chinese virus. Mm-hmm. And it's an easy one to pull over on people because somewhere it seems to make sense. Can you explain this? The so-called China is our bank. China is really the owner of this country now. Yeah, and you're right. It plays into a lot of fear and anxiety of the other, and foreigners and all that kind of stuff. It makes people anxious. So think about why China holds about $1 trillion in U.S. Treasuries, and Japan has about $1 trillion as well. And for a politician to stand up and say, we're borrowing from China, well, that makes it sound like the U.S. is weak, that it had to go to China to borrow. But the reason that China has treasuries is because China has oriented its economy around manufacturing lots of cheap stuff, putting it in containers, shipping it over here. And in exchange for those things that they manufacture and ship to us, we ship them. Well, we don't actually, we just credit a bank account, but they get dollars. So China ends up with, let's call it a checking account at the Federal Reserve. They get it with dollars in it. Now, we give China the same option that we give anybody else who holds US dollars. And that option is you can trade your dollars in for US government bonds, treasuries. And so China has the option to keep its dollars in a checking account at the Fed, or to move those dollars into what's effectively a savings account, a securities account at the Fed. And that means that they buy treasuries. So we debit their checking account and we credit their securities account. And that's what we call borrowing from China. Okay.
there's nothing dangerous. It doesn't put us in a vulnerable position. China gets to hold their dollars in an interest-bearing account instead of a non-interest-bearing account. That's what we're doing. Do we have to do that? No. We don't have to sell bonds at all. There's no reason that the government, in fact, I don't know if you saw this, but Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, did you happen to see the legislation?
I just read this just before we started this podcast. Can you explain this? Because it was I saw this online, and I know Rashida. We've been friends for a while in Detroit. But why don't you explain this? Because this is the first thing I thought of too was you, because this is something that you and the other economists like you are trying to get our heads thinking about money in a different way. So this is her $2 trillion. There's two coins, and each are worth $1 trillion. So I'll turn it over to you.
Well, yeah. I mean, I haven't actually had an opportunity to read the bill, and I wasn't responsible. Somebody I know, Rowan Gray, actually worked with her staff and drafted this. But so basically what she is saying is there is a way to create a balance for the U.S. Treasury, their checking account at the Federal Reserve. There's a way to top that account up. We can put $2 trillion in the Treasury's account from which they can spend to do things to help working people and so forth to get through this crisis. And we can do it without increasing the national debt. And I think, but I'm not positive, but I think the motivation is that after the financial crisis and through the Great Recession, when it became clear that, deficits were exploding and people started to panic. And the reason they started to panic was that these deficits involved borrowing, and the borrowing meant increasing the national debt. And that makes people really, really nervous. And so I think what she's done is just to demonstrate that there is a way to create the spendable balances that the Treasury will need as it, pays for whatever it's going to do to fight this crisis without adding to the national debt. So here's her idea. She says, we're going to use the U.S. Treasury is going to mint two coins. They're proof platinum. And a lawyer many years ago discovered a loophole in the law that would allow the Treasury Secretary to strike a coin, put any face value on it he or she chooses, $1 trillion, $5 trillion, $100 trillion, 700 trillion, whatever you want. You stamp it with that number, and you take it over to the Federal Reserve and you say, please deposit this in my account. And the Fed takes the coin and it sits on the asset at the Federal Reserve on the asset side of its books. And the Fed changes the numbers in the Treasury account up to $2 trillion in this case. And so that's the legislation. And then she says, we're not going to issue any treasuries. So we'll have a balance, we'll deficit spend through this crisis, but we're not going to sell U.S. treasuries, and we're not going to add to the debt. And I think the thinking is that it will just help keep people calm.
Yeah, I just I'll post a link to this also on the podcast platform here. People want to look at this because it's so refreshing, especially to be even trying to even think this out during what we're all facing right now. I mean, this is life right now is unlike anything that we have seen in any of our lifetimes.
Yeah, I think that, and I think probably part of what's going on here is that she just wants to make it visibly apparent to everyone that the money is there, that we don't have to wonder and ask this question in perpetuity. How are we going to pay for it? Where will the money come from? This is just, a quick way to change the numbers up in the Treasury's account and to be able to point to it and say, okay, now there are the funds. You can see them. So we don't have to have this conversation about how we're going to pay for this. I just made the deposit. Let's get to work. Yeah,
I think it's just, I just read it before we turned the microphones on here. And I just thought, wow, this is really something. So before we go here, I just want to talk about, you got this book, I think you mentioned that's coming up. When is it publishing? It's publishing in, is it June?
June 9th.
June 9th. You even know the date. Does anything ever matter anymore, though? Are there dates to anything for the rest of 2020? I mean, can anybody?
Every day I say to my husband, is it Monday? Is it when? I don't even know. Every day is the same in some sense now.
Yeah, it does feel like that, doesn't it? And but the book is called The Deficit Myth, Modern Monetary Theory and the Birth of the People's Economy. So this book, which I have not read, but I assume that you explain these things to people so that when they hear the sort of false question, the fake debate of how are you going to pay for that? What do you mean Green New Deal? What do you mean Medicare for all? We don't have the money for that. That there's the right way to look at this instead of this convoluted, fear-inducing, they're going to take your private health insurance away. All of that stuff. That it just drives me crazy, and I feel so bad that people are just kind of hoodwinked by it because on some level it makes some kind of sense, but the truth is that you're just being lied to.
That's right. I wrote it to empower people because, people need a better understanding of this stuff. And there are just not many voices out there trying to really level with people and talk them through how this stuff works. So I tried to do this in the book in a way that is really highly accessible, free of academic jargon. There are no graphs in the book. There's not a chart. There are no graphs. There's no, I kept it just really, really simple. And there's a whole chapter on Social Security. You hear this over and over again, entitlements, the crisis driving our long-term debt crisis. I mean, I just debunk, I hope, successfully, all of these myths that we hear about the national debt and entitlements and trade deficits and the budget deficit, and try to empower people so that, when your member of Congress comes home to their district and you show up at a town hall event or whatever, and you start banging your fist and saying, why aren't we doing this? And why aren't we doing that? And why aren't we solving this problem? And they turn to you and say, listen, I think I'm with you. I care about those things too, but we got this $23 trillion debt, or we got this $1 trillion deficit, and we just don't have the money. I want people in that room to be empowered to stand up and push back and say, you're wrong. I know better. I know better.
Wow. Well, this sounds great. That just to have that ammunition, just to have that explanation, when this book comes out. I'm sorry it's got to come out during a time when you're probably not going to be able to go on a book tour, but you can come on, podcasts like this. You can go on TV. Hopefully you'll be able to get this out there. Do you have a publisher? I'm sure the book's already printed by now.
Yeah, I think it's being printed as we speak, but yes, it's Public Affairs is publishing the book.
Okay. So that's a good publisher. So hopefully this book will get out. And I didn't mention at the beginning, but you worked for the Senate Budget Committee on the Democratic side. Was it during the Obama years or?
Yeah, it was. Let's see. I took the job at the end of 2014, so 15 and part of 16. And I was the chief economist for the Democrats on the Senate Budget Committee. Senator Sanders was ranking member, so he hired me into that job.
Well, I think a lot of the ideas that Bernie has proposed and a lot of what you've said has really helped people have some hope that it's not just some theory or some idea that's just floating out there, but it's a practical thing, and so that when we try to talk about the things that we need, Medicare for all, tuition-free college, daycare, I mean, just go down the list. All of this is possible. It's not pie in the sky. It's not. Nobody's thinking of paying for it with monopoly money. And it's been very hard for our side. It's very hard for, whatever our side is, whatever that means. I mean, even last week when Nancy was talking about the means testing, that maybe not some of the Democrats or certainly the Republicans were like, nah, they don't like the idea of giving everybody a check. It should be a means test. It's such a, even one of the moderators today on CNN, when they were talking about it, and he said, well, I don't need the $1,000 check. I make a lot of money here at CNN. And it's like, no, you're missing the point. It's why you wouldn't say to the public schools that maybe your kid's going to, well, I don't need a free public school. I can pay for this. You don't walk into the library and go, I don't need a free library. I should be paying for this. You already, yes, you should be paying for it. And hopefully we're taxing you. If you're making a lot of money at CNN, we're taxing you to pay for that library and that public school. But there's a reason why you don't want to create a two-tier system where those who have to pay for these things that we have decided long ago are a human right. And it seems that it's very hard to get this across. And when you hear Democrats repeating this kind of thinking, it's like, oh no, don't go there. It's,
yeah, I mean, this means testing stuff is slippery slope. And the Democrats want to, try to draw arbitrary lines and come up with some, 85,000. Well, if you make more than 8, and the Republicans too, And I said to my husband, so they're telling people today, I'm watching CNN, and they say, should you take your child, or should you go to the dentist if you have an appointment? Should you go if you're supposed to have an eye appointment or whatever? They said, no, don't go. So now your kid's got braces. I got a kid with braces. She had an appointment. We missed it. But what happens to the dental hygienist? I mean, these are higher salaried people, right? But they have a mortgage.
Sure.
Payment. They have, Lord knows, they probably have student loan debt from going through med school or dental school or whatever the case may be. So we're going to say, oh, well, we carve them out. We're not going to worry about them because they're living pretty close to paycheck to paycheck. I mean, you drop them completely out of this, you carve them out, and you're going to have real strain on families. They don't have 3 or 6 or 12 months of savings set aside. They can't weather that.
The way we have set up our American economy, to have these winners and losers, to have people struggling to get by from week to week, to have the sense of fear and anxiety, that statistic about 40-50% of the country doesn't have $500 to their name if they had an emergency and they needed cash. They don't have the availability to that it's people are so ratcheted. They're so ratcheted with this pressure, and to place a pandemic on top of this, on top of everybody, the burden, the people listening to this right now today, listen to us talking about this, they've got to, not only do they got to, I know because I've heard from so many of them this week, they can't carry this burden. They can't get through it. The level of despair and depression, it was already bad enough just trying to, hopefully we can get through this year and be done with Trump. But that was enough already to create this sense of anxiety. But that we have a pandemic on top of this, and because of the pandemic, we now have an economic crash on top of it. Stephanie, it's too much. It's too much. And I don't know what to say to people. I don't know. I try to tell them the pandemic will be over. 80% of us who get this virus are going to be just fine. We're going to have a bad cold. That's it. I'm not trying to, everybody who listens to me know I'm not trying to sugarcoat anything, because I've been very clear about how many people are going to die as a result of the inaction from the White House for the last 2+ months. People, even Bernie would say, it's like one of his first lines, and whenever you hear him speak, that we have to remove the most dangerous president. He used to say in modern history, he's dropped the modern part. It's now clear this is the most dangerous president. But, we would point out how dangerous he is and the things that he's done. If people knew the half of what he has done to gut the EPA, what in terms of the dangers that we're in because of just that alone, there's so many things though. that we just don't even have the time to get into. But but now he really is the most dangerous. Literally, people are going to die as a result of this. So I'm just, before we leave, I don't know what you have said to people or what you would say to people, but this is a heavy, heavy burden to carry right now. And yet, if we are paralyzed and we don't move, if we don't make that call to the Senate switchboard today, if we just allow it to unfold, the consequences after the pandemic, and there will be an after. It's not going to kill everybody. It's going to kill a lot of people, but it's not going to kill everybody. We're going to be here, and we're going to be in a much, much worse situation. And I mean, people must be asking you this. Your students must be asking you this. What? Help me out here. How do I get through this? Because I don't know how much more people can take.
It's the scariest moment in my lifetime, unquestionably. The only thing that I can try to do is, I had a piece run in the New York Times this morning. And again, it's just to the extent that I can offer something that has a calming effect. And for me, in my area of expertise, it's to say, don't let funding ever cause us to do what must be done to help people, to make them whole, to keep them whole through this crisis. The money can always be there. The last thing I can put up with is having the conversation turn to the price tag is too much, the deficit, the government can't afford. We have to, all of that has to be swept aside. We cannot let that interfere with the legislative process, with getting the dollars where they need to go, and with making it clear that the federal government stands prepared to do whatever it takes. Steadfast commitment through this crisis, that they're not going to do a little and then pull back, that they're going to stand here. Whatever it takes needs to be the message again and again, I think is the most reassuring thing that we can hear from lawmakers right now, is that they're not going to let anything prevent them from using the full force of the public purse, because that's why it exists. It exists for the public. And Congress can make it clear, and they can alleviate some of the anxiety that people are feeling in terms of just their personal finances. Am I going to be okay? Am I going to be able to pay the rent? Am I going to be able to get groceries? Am I going to be able to take care of myself and come out of this on the other end? And for me, that's what I'm hoping Congress is going to do, is to step up and use the full force of the public purse to protect the American people through this crisis.
They won't do that if we don't force them to do it. I mean,
no, they won't. And so it's really important that enough of us believe and understand, even if we don't fully understand, that we believe that they have the power to do what must be done and to remain committed through the entirety of this crisis.
Where is FDR when you need him?
Yeah.
Wow. Franklin Roosevelt.
We don't have a visionary. I mean, at least not in the seat that matters most.
Right, but he controls it all right now, Trump. It's when the investigations are done after this is all over, when they try to answer the question, why did nothing happen for 2 months? Mm-hmm. One of the things that's been going on is he's been trying to figure out what kind of money can he make off it, his family make off it, his donors, his supporters, his cronies, all the contracts that needed to go out to get those face masks, the contracts that needed to go out to get those ventilators, to build those hospital beds, all the things that needed to happen got held up, got slowed down on some level because there was what's in it for us? Who can we give this to? that's what I'm telling you, I already know right now when the investigation is done, this will be a piece of it. It won't be the whole thing, but it's going to be a piece of it. And, I don't know. The Supermax prison in Florence, Colorado might be a good place for this whole thing to end up. But for right now, I don't want people to give up. I don't want people who are listening to this to think that we're completely helpless here because of who's sitting in the White House, who's sitting in the United States Senate. They need to know that there will be hell to pay if in these next 24 hours and in these days and weeks ahead, if they don't do their job to do what the right thing is for the American people, the American worker. I don't know. Can I sound more threatening than that? I'm a nonviolent person, so I hope this is all taken in the right way. But I am a citizen of this damn country, and I will not sit by. And I hope the people listening to this will join me and not sit by either. So, Stephanie, you've given us a lot of great information here today. I encourage people to buy your book when it comes out. I will buy it. And, keep doing what you're doing to inform us and educate us. It means a lot.
You do, Mike.
Well, no, it's, I was getting ready for this podcast today, and I was watching Governor Cuomo, and he wanted to give out some good news. He wanted to announce that that Goldman Sachs has decided to give the face masks that they have in their storage facility, 100,000 face masks that Goldman Sachs is donating to the state of New York. And, my first thought was, what is Goldman Sachs doing with 100,000 face masks in the closet? What world do we live in? I don't know. You don't have to answer that question. I'm just like,
I wouldn't have an answer.
There's no answer to this. It's madness. It's madness. Thank you, Stephanie Kelton, for being part of my Rumble podcast today. Keep up the good work. And to everybody listening, you know what you have to do. This has been Rumble with Michael Moore. And we'll talk to you again, hopefully tomorrow.